heard this story from a friend of mine. She worked with this Ukrainian man who had a Swedish colleague. So one day, this Ukrainian man and the Swedish man go on a work conference together. And the Swedish man comes by to fetch the Ukrainian man early in the morning. And he's shocked to realize that the Ukrainian man's wife has gotten up at 5 in the morning to make breakfast and lunch for her husband. When he tells him this, the Ukrainian man says, "Does your wife not do the same?" And here, folks, is the first difference between the mentality around relationships in Western and Eastern Europe. The first point I'm going to talk about is gender roles. Yes, I'm sure it's not going to be much of a surprise to you when I say that Eastern Europeans are quite traditional when it comes to gender roles. There are so many videos done on Eastern European women and how they expect the man to pay through the nose until he goes broke, that this subject has become somewhat redundant, but it's definitely still worth mentioning. I grew up in Russia and came to Canada when I was 12 years old, so I had a very Eastern European mindset when I just started dating. If I liked the guy, I would sit there, my heart beating, hoping he would pay the bill. If he did not, I would be so disappointed. In my eyes, he practically stopped being a man. I didn't want to see him again. Yes, this might sound super harsh and weird, especially if you come from a completely different world. But this is why culture is so interesting to talk about, as we do see the world through our own cultural lens. Now, of course, there are women that expect men to take them to the most expensive restaurant with valet parking and to foot a giant bill, but I find that those women are either using men or they're so self-absorbed that they believe that they deserve the highest treatment only. And yes, I admit this trend is much higher in Eastern European countries than it is in Western Europe. But when we're talking about the regular non-gold digging Eastern European women, it still makes sense that the man pays the bill on the first date, because it's just what you do. But why so? Well, firstly, there's a big gender disparity. It's also a gesture that shows the man is financially stable and can support a family down the line. What's more, men's status matters. It matters way more than his good looks or physique. Status is very important in Eastern Europe, and honestly, this is something I really hate about the mentality. It's so important to rub people's noses into what you own, what kind of bag you have, what kind of car you drive, what kind of shoes you wear, and what kind of house you live in. Everything is for show. I talked about this in the last video, but I believe that it largely comes down to living in communism and a life of deprivation. So when you break out of that, you want to show the whole world that, yes, I've made it. We see this in many countries around the world where people wear brand labels and drive the shiniest car only to prove that they're no longer poor. I remember seeing this in Miami with Miami Cubans, for example. And then we have the most equal countries like Sweden or the Netherlands, where there's nothing to prove as everyone is equal. And even if you're the prime minister, you ride your bike to work like your regular Joe. While the views are changing worldwide around gender roles, never-ending debate about femininity, masculinity, who pays on the date, which gender roles are considered archaic, I find that feminism still has a negative connotation in countries like Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and some of the other Balkan countries, but to a lesser extent in countries such as Poland, Hungary, or Czech Republic. In Eastern Europe, times may be changing, but the woman still has an expectation to be the keeper of the home, and the man has to take care of the financial side of things. Women are called weaker sex, and most women actually enjoy being treated as a delicate being which a strong man can protect and take care of. The men are typically more macho and direct, and especially countries like Serbia or Bulgaria, while I find the Balkan women are also quite temperamental and strong-willed. But overall, there's a sense that these gender dynamics are good because attraction comes from the polarity, the yin and the yang. Some Southern European countries like Italy or Greece typically have those gender roles as well. This is why you will often see intercultural relationships with Eastern European women and Italian or Turkish men, because the values around gender roles are similar. Also, Turkish men know flattery like no other, and they're very generous with their money and gifts. But funny enough, while most Eastern European women have no issues with dating outside their culture, and a lot of them actually want to date outside their culture, most Eastern European men prefer to date women from their own cultures. And I believe it kind of makes sense. Here are some interesting statistics so you can see what Western versus Eastern Europeans think about gender roles. When surveyed, 96% of Swedes said gender equality is very important. The Netherlands, France, and Germany are right up there with that belief, and even Greece, which is actually quite surprising. And then we have Hungary, quite high still, Poland and Bulgaria, Czech, Slovakia, Lithuania, and bottom of the list are Russia and Ukraine with 1 point difference. And our random friend, the US. What you doing there, US? And then another set of statistics focusing on egalitarian marriage, where Swedes, French, and Spanish prefer the wife and the husband splitting the chores, while Russia, Ukraine, and Lithuania are at the very bottom, wanting the man to provide. And then our friend the US leveling up with Russia again. Kind of weird. And only 47% of Russian, 54% Lithuanian, and 57% Slovak men think women should have the same rights as them. Russian women vote in at only 60% compared to 90% of Hungarian women, and even higher, 93% of French women. Funny enough, no matter the numbers, men always come up at lower percentage for wanting gender equality than women, which is kind of interesting and maybe not so surprising. The second difference is the appearance. The reason Eastern European girls are so sought after around the world is not only because they are genetically beautiful, but is that they put a lot of focus onto being beautiful. Honestly, I've never felt as ugly as when I recently visited Poland. There were beautiful Polish women and there were beautiful Ukrainian women. Everybody was just so beautiful. But yes, there is some genetic voodoo that has caused very beautiful women and not so attractive men to come together to create more beautiful women and more not so attractive men. That is not to say that all Eastern European men are unattractive, but the contrast between very beautiful women and the men is stark. I also believe that Eastern European men haven't been much encouraged to take care of themselves, thinking, this will do. We used to have an expression that said, men shouldn't be more attractive than a monkey, which gives you an idea on the mindset around male attractiveness. I do believe that this is changing with the rise of the gym culture and the Instagram culture, and just with the newer generation in general. Trends do change. But overall, I find that you can still have a bald head and a big pouch and think you have an array of options just because you're a man who has financial status. I had my Eastern European girlfriends share the horror of going back home and getting on Tinder just to look at the options that they had available. And even those options seem to think that they were the best of the best. Another reason why Eastern European women put so much effort into their appearance is the supply and demand. Simply put, there are many beautiful women, so they have to work twice as hard to stay on top. And we are largely affected by what's around us. So if you see women around you looking flawless, chances are your standards go up as well. You're essentially competing with other women because, as you know, women judge women. We can see the same thing in countries like Colombia, Brazil, or Korea, where you have a sort of pretty power. In Colombia, you have more chances of being hired if you look a certain way. And this often leads to plastic surgeries. More than half of Russian celebrities, for example, have giant lips and look practically identical. Ask a German, Dutch, or French woman about Eastern Europeans and they will typically scoff at how much effort they put into their appearance. It's almost as if they feel that Eastern European women are prostituting themselves for men. Typically, and of course I'm generalizing here, Western European women don't put as much attention into how they look. Sure, many dress up, put makeup on, and look beautiful, but I find that it's simply incomparable with a daily routine of a typical Eastern European woman. French women believe less is more. German and Dutch women tend to keep it quite casual. And British women think that more is not nearly enough.
Get out of the group chat, you little smelly ming.
No matter how independent you are as a woman in Eastern Europe, from childhood, you're being drilled in that the only way to truly be successful is to have a family. These are values that many Western European women would scoff at, but ones that Southern European women can really relate to. And people take relationships quite seriously. I find that while things are changing around the world and we are becoming more commitment phobic, dating in Eastern Europe is typically approached with an intent towards a serious relationship and a marriage. You don't just date around to see how things would go. People typically are more intentional and straightforward with what they want. This, I find, is also true for Poland and the Balkans, where people highly uphold the same traditional values. I remember meeting a beautiful Russian girl from a more conservative part of Russia, and she was telling me about her relationship with a Russian guy who has moved to the US when he was younger. She was complaining to me that she was so frustrated that this guy just wasn't serious with his intent. He wanted to keep dating her, but he also wanted to keep traveling the world and doing all these kind of things. How could he think so frivolously, she told me. He's already 26 and I'm 24, ready to be in a committed relationship and ready to build a family. There's a strong expectation in Eastern Europe that you meet someone and get married early, and that you have kids early, pressure that is sometimes incredibly difficult for women, as they often just get married to whomever, so they won't be judged, ostracized, or lose the opportunity to create a family. In the last video, I had mentioned that Russia and Ukraine had the lowest ages for getting married in Europe, at 28 years old for men and 25 for women, while Belarus is at 28 years old for men and 26 for women. These are by far the lowest numbers in all of Europe, and very interesting when you compare it to Western Europe, which differs of course, but tends to be higher. The next one on the list is chivalry and gift giving. This strongly relates to gender roles, but I wanted to talk about it separately. I believe that Eastern Europeans and Balkans are strongly raised with the idea of gallantry and gift giving. In school, I remember boys giving us flowers for International Women's Day, which I later realized wasn't so international because most of the world hasn't even heard about it. But yes, the belief was you may be too poor to buy a gift, but you must scramble to find money to at least buy flowers. In general, there's a big culture of giving flowers to women, which might be going away now, but even if we look at going to someone's birthday party, it's very common that Eastern European men come with flowers when Western European or American men wouldn't even consider this. And it's important noting that it's not just men to women. It's a general must for visiting someone's house. You just don't show up empty-handed. And especially if it's someone's birthday, it's unthinkable to come without a present or some flowers in hand. I remember growing up in Russia, we even had a tradition of bringing flowers for our teachers on the first day of school. It's common to buy gifts for doctors, officials, and anyone you rely on to do a good job as a way of thanking them. It may be considered bribing or completely unnecessary in Western Europe, but as you know, in Eastern Europe, things didn't quite work well enough, so we had to pave our way through with gifts. So yes, in a way, I guess it is bribing. There are also many flower shops in Eastern Europe. But interestingly enough, the Netherlands is the biggest producer of flowers. I say interestingly because Dutch culture doesn't encourage flower giving in the least. But other things like opening the door, carrying a heavy bag are very common in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and the Balkans. As I mentioned in one of the last videos, I was traveling Poland with a luggage, and I've had so many men reach out and offer to carry my luggage, sometimes just lift it up and carry it for me. In Western and more so in northern part of Europe, I feel that there is a fear around doing those kind of things for a woman, as she might actually tell someone off for doing those things and assuming that she's weak or incapable in, carrying her bag herself or opening the door herself. And that, I feel, is part of the reason why men are simply discouraged from doing those kind of chivalrous actions. I personally see chivalry as something beautiful and worth preserving. There's nothing better than a man who holds the door open, can carry your heavy bag, or open the car door from time to time. It doesn't make me feel inferior, it makes me feel protected and respected, which is such a wonderful feeling. And it's such a shame that we're losing this in this constant debate of what is what. So here's my take on the differences between two continents. I talked a little bit more about Eastern Europe than Western Europe because I feel like I talk about Western Europe too much. If you feel like you're getting value from these videos, then your follow literally means the world. It takes a lot of work to keep this going, so this small gesture shows to me that you like me enough to keep watching. Also, I have a podcast. Go check it out. Do you have any requests for commentary style videos like this? Let me know in the comments below. And as usual, stay curious and keep breaking down your barriers.